Hi, I'm Barb. I've been a teacher's aide and SLSO in the Department of Education for about 22 years. Here's my story. I had a sister, Nolene, who was born a few years before me, and she had Down syndrome. And just before my mother passed recently, she told me that when she gave birth to Nolene, the doctors took Nolene away and didn't come back to her for many hours, and Mum didn't know what was wrong. Back in those days, partners and husbands didn't go into the hospital, so Mum was left alone for many hours. When the doctors came back, they said Nolene had Down syndrome and heart issues, and Mum and Dad probably wouldn't be able to look after them, so she was put into a hospice, and unfortunately she passed away 7 months later. I also had a brother, Michael. He was born 2 years after me in 1964. He had an intellectual disability. Back then it was referred to as being mentally retarded. He used to escape all the time, so as a child we lived in a locked house because every opportunity he'd get to escape he'd take off, and we often had neighbours looking for him and in the streets, and everyone got to know him. He got harder to manage as he got older. As my father worked away a lot, Mum was on her own with us and Michael, and there was no help. There was no outside help, and back then a lot of children were institutionalised, so Mum and Dad made the decision to put Michael into Marsden Rehabilitation Centre at Westmead, which had hundreds of children back then. He'd live there, go to school there, and we'd just go and see him on weekends. Such a hard decision for my parents, but there was just so little help available in home back then. After growing up with a brother with a disability, I always wanted to work in disability care. I used to volunteer, do work experience at Marsden where Michael was when I was probably 13 years old, because I went to school across the road, Macaulay College at Westmead. I just loved working with those kids, even from a young age. Unfortunately, Michael got diagnosed with bone cancer when he was 17 and died 18 months later. So he was my best friend, and unfortunately I couldn't look at a person with a disability for probably 15 years after that, until I moved to Coffs Harbour. And then one day I walked into William Barlin Public School and asked to volunteer, and I stayed there for many years, and then I moved to Toormina High, and it's been the best thing I ever did. And yeah, I've just loved my time here. I've worked with many students from kindy all the way to year 12, and I've watched their progress. That's such a gratifying experience, and makes you so proud on that last day when they leave, that you've watched their journey. Yeah, it's really good. I've always found the staff that work with students with disabilities to have something special. They're kind and empathetic, but I'd really like to just thank every school staff member that I've worked with, from my fellow SLSOs, the teachers that I've had the pleasure to work with over the years, past and present. It's gratifying to know that the support services for people with disabilities has changed so much over the years since I've been working, but such a long way to go. We're pretty privileged still in a Western society to have what we have. So many students with disabilities in other countries, third world countries, are still such a long way behind, but we've got to see some great advances here, and I hope it continues. Thanks, Toormina High.